In this video, I'm going to be talking about how Sino-Korean vocabulary preserves Middle Chinese pronunciations. And so today we're going to be looking in particular at the end consonants. So we're going to start with the syllable structure and then talk about the inventory of end consonants. And we'll look at the numbers in Chinese and in Sino-Korean as a case study. And lastly, we'll end with the case of the number 1 and how that reveals a little bit of how Chinese sounds were adapted into Korean phonology. So let's first look at the sound structures. And so first we'll look here and then we'll look at the inventory. And so for Korean, so what ends up happening is you have Chinese sounds and it gets filtered through, this is the Korean sound system. And what ends up happening is as it gets filtered through the Korean sound system, this is what you have called the Sino-Korean pronunciations. So the best is if you think about loanwords in English that we have. And so, from French or Italian, etc. And it gets filtered through English pronunciation, and that's how you get our loanwords. And so what's interesting is that in Chinese you have vowel, consonant vowel, and then you have consonant vowel, consonant. And then in Middle Chinese, you didn't really have consonant clusters, so you didn't have things like consonant vowel consonant or any of these kind of structures, although old Chinese probably did have that. And so what we're looking at in particular is the preservation of these end consonants, which has mostly dropped out in Mandarin, which is what is most widely spoken in China today. So we'll look at the inventory of Mandarin, Cantonese, and Korean. And so what's interesting about Cantonese is that it preserves Middle Chinese end consonants, just like Korean does. And so in modern Mandarin, you only have 2 end consonants, the N sound or a nasal NG sound. So for example, you have something like shan for mountain, or shang, the ang sound for up, for example. But in Cantonese, you have 6. You have a P, you have T, K, M, N, and NG sound. And Korean has 7, so the most out of these 3 languages. And so what's interesting is how Cantonese and Korean preserves these sounds while Mandarin has dropped almost all of these sounds. And so what's interesting about these end consonants is they are unvoiced and they're also unreleased, which I will illustrate in the next page. So if you look at the number system, let's zoom in here a little bit. So in the first column, you have the Chinese characters, and then you have on the far left, you have the Arabic numerals. And then the pinyin is for Mandarin pronunciation, and Cantonese has a lot of different romanizations. So this is the one I got from the dictionary that I use. And Sino-Korean is the Korean pronunciation of these numbers. So starting with Mandarin, I haven't included the tones here, but this is just to help illustrate the syllable structure. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And you see at least from 1 to 10, you have N here, and then everything else, the R is kind of like part of the vowel in some sense, so that doesn't count as an N consonant. So you only have 1. And then Cantonese, I don't speak Cantonese, but so this is my approximation of how it sounds. So please excuse me if it doesn't sound quite right. You have ya, yi, sam, say, lok, tat, bat, go, sup. And so this is more like a Y here. And then you will notice that you have a lot more end consonants than in Mandarin. And in Korean, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then I added 0 and 1,000 for the NG and also for the N consonant. Ling, qian for Mandarin. And I don't know how to say it in Canto, but you have yang and chun. And so what you'll notice is that in terms of the N consonants, for Mandarin, you only have 1 out of 1 to 10, or here you have NG. And then also in Cantonese, you notice that you have a T sound, M, K, T, T, P sounds. And then you also see in Korean, it matches quite well. The only discrepancy you'll notice is between the T and the L, which is a particularly interesting phenomenon in Korean as it adapted, as the Chinese sounds adapted into Korean. So let me talk about this with the case of the number for number 1. And so if you look at some of the dictionaries, you can have a Middle Chinese reconstruction, which has 4 components. It's maybe pronounced something like jie. I don't know the exact tone. So you have a j, e, t sound. And so we'll notice that in Mandarin, you have the J sound and the I sound merge into a y and an e sound, while it drops the ut part. So it only kind of has this component. If you look at the Cantonese, what you'll notice is the J and the I have merged into a y sound, and then the as into a, and then the N consonant T has been preserved. And if you look into the Korean pronunciation, the J is dropped, the I is preserved, the sound, E sound is dropped, and then interestingly, you have a T that has turned into an L sound, so it becomes il. So what's interesting in using the number 1, jit sound, which is a reconstruction, the final T sound could be written as a digut. However, in Middle Korean, it was for whatever reason not have like a, so you could have it had been eat like this, but Koreans at that time, for whatever reason, didn't like to have a T as the end consonant. So they much more preferred the L sound. And so what they would write is, for example, for this sound, the Middle Korean would have been this with something here, which is not used in modern Korean anymore. So this is called ing, and it would have written like this in the sort of the name of the letter. And if you know, this is a vowel sound. So if you had, for example, a, and this will be a more restriction in the vocal cords. So this would be a, and this would be a. And then if you had a sound like this, and then if you had this, it's a little bit of a stronger sound. So you have and And so what this would have been is an approximation. So if you had il, and then this would have been il with a restriction in the throat. It would have been il. And so it kind of approximates this sound. And so here is the phenomenon that happened, is that in the Korean language, there's a preference for the ril as a pachim and not the digut as a pachim. So then you will have quite a lot of words. For example, this is the word for moon. And in modern Korean, it's pronounced wol. But then in the Cantonese, there's a end, I think it's yue with a T in Canto. And so how they used to write it in Middle Korean was like this. And it's pronounced what, which is an approximation of this. And so one of the significant patterns that you'll notice is that you have Middle Chinese. All the end consonants T is translated as L sound, or by the Ryul sound in Korean, Sino-Korean. And so yeah, that's one of those things of just language preferences, and that's kind of recorded. And so if you are learning a Sino-Korean word and there is a Ryul 받침 in Cantonese or in Middle Chinese, it would have been a T sound. So that's what I have for today. I hope this was interesting, and thanks for watching.